Thank you, all of you, for going through the process and to be able to go through these questions and issues. Stuckelberg, let me ask you a question. What are your thoughts about Congress having the authority to determine the scope and authority of federal agencies? Does Congress have the authority to determine the scope and the task on federal agencies?
If I understand your question, Senator, I think that Congress, working with other entities, has the ability to pass laws. And if that's what you're asking me.
Sure. Yeah, just trying to figure out I guess just more of a constitutional question of who sets the parameters for agencies. Can agencies decide what they want to do, or are those parameters set by Congress?
Senator, I've been nominated for the position of Assistant Secretary for Policy Management.
But dealing with policy,
And we'll absolutely be dealing with policy. Looking forward to working with you and others on this committee. I think that's outside the scope of what I will be doing on a day-to-day basis. I know the one thing that I will do is I will follow the regulations and the rules and the laws and work to implement the policies of the Secretary and the President.
That's great. I asked, in 2016, you wrote at one point, in the face of persistent inaction in Congress to close the gaps in the nation's gun laws that leave many communities vulnerable to near-daily gun violence, today's common-sense actions demonstrate this administration's continued commitment to taking a comprehensive approach to addressing this public health crisis. Okay, no issue there. Then the next statement is, Center for American Progress is eager to continue working with leaders across the country to follow the President's example and explore opportunities to take action now without waiting for a recalcitrant legislature. That's one. In 2013, you wrote, there are more than a dozen appropriation riders passed each year, typically without any discussion or debate, which significantly limit the federal government's ability to regulate the firearms industry. Congress has interfered with the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms and Explosives' ability to fulfill its mission by enacting riders to the appropriation bills that dilute its power over licensed gun dealers. So the reason I ask is it's a philosophical question, but it is a practical effect to try to figure out just your perspective on whether Congress has the authority, for instance, to give instructions through legislation, that's appropriation riders, is legislation, to give instructions to the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms Explosives to be able to deal with what they can do and cannot do, or to be able to deal with firearms, or if agencies or entities, or your office in the future in dealing with firearms policy on Department of Interior lands, for instance, what that's going to look like. How wide is that latitude, or is that set by Congress?
Senator, I look forward to working with you on further addressing this question, but let me zoom out for just one moment and say that absolutely Congress passes laws and works with agencies. As you know, the executive branch has the ability to pass regulations, and so there is one of the things that I'm looking forward to, if I'm confirmed, is working with Congress to achieve policies that address climate change, affect the conservation of our public lands, and that's the job that I'm before you now seeking to talk about. And so if you're asking me whether agencies have latitude to issue regulations and Congress has latitude to pass laws and write appropriations riders, absolutely both of them are true.
Yeah. To me, it's more of a philosophical conversation, trying to figure out what kind of relationship we would have, because constitutionally, Congress obviously writes the laws. Regulations are created that have to be consistent with those laws. A regulator can't just create regulations outside of the scope of what law is already there. And so what I'm trying to figure out is when you write things like, oh, recalcitrant, Congress is not doing it, and so the administration is going to do it, or that appropriation riders are limiting the actions of an agency and what they want to do. I'm trying to figure out a philosophical basis on this. I do want to drill down on one other issue as well. You mentioned about the success of the Endangered Species Act. There are some species that have recovered on that, but if I remember correctly, it's about 2% of the species that have actually graduated out of being listed in the Endangered Species Act. It's been a challenge for us in Oklahoma, for instance. We're dealing with the lesser prairie chicken in the western side of our state. We've done a lot of voluntary cooperation. Our farmers and ranchers and commercial entities have done a lot of work. And when the agency steps in and says, thanks for all your work on this, but now we're going to take it from here, it diminishes some of that. So we do have some work to be able to do to actually have the Endangered Species Act actually be successful. because I don't see a 2% graduation rate as successful. So there's some things that we still need to be able to do to try to recover these species and graduate them off.
Senator, if I just might comment, if I'm confirmed, I look forward to coming to Oklahoma and learning more about it. I think the partnership of ranchers and farmers and local communities and engaged stakeholders is essential, not just for the successful implementation of the Endangered Species Act, but for all the laws and policies that are promulgated by the Department of Interior. And if I'm confirmed, I hope I'll be able to work further with you and your staff on that issue.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.